How should we go about exploring the history of atonement theory? I'm going to apologize beforehand. I'm probably going to move around a lot. This is really just the beginning of the discussion. Before I really even have the discussion, I want to think through what would I touch on if I wanted to actually break down atonement theory and history. There are a lot of concepts that are interesting to me and that I think would probably aid in trying to figure out how the church has articulated atonement, why it's articulated atonement, for how long, when and where. I think a question that's very interesting to me is, where do I begin the exploration? Like if you imagine a timeline, where should I start this exploration? I have a suspicion that when most Christians today think about it, they want to plant the flag sometime around Jesus for where to start this discussion, but that to me is problematic. Yeshua says in Matthew 5, he didn't come to abolish the Torah and the prophets, he came to fulfill them. And so that's like, you can imagine people wondering, what is his relationship to the Torah? He's doing things that are at odds with the scribes and the Pharisees, who tend to be people who try to tell us, what the appropriate yoke of the Torah is, what's the appropriate interpretation of it. And when Yeshua talks about himself, he's being tricky, but he says, you want to understand me? You want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing? Go look at the Torah and the prophets. It's not just I don't think it's just a statement to put the crowds at ease. I think it's kind of a cipher that he who has the ears to hear, he who has the eyes to see, will be able to understand that if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty of why this Yeshua guy is doing the things he's doing, that's easy. Go to the law and the prophets. Go to the Torah and the prophets. So, if he starts speaking in his ministry, albeit like in a cryptic way, and then really only directly to his disciples past a certain point in his ministry, he's talking about his death being connected to the Torah and the prophets, and that he's working his ministry toward his death, towards his rejection, his betrayal, and his crucifixion. But then it seems disingenuous if you take his word seriously. Like, obviously, if you're in a different camp and you don't believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, or you don't believe that he actually said those things, or you don't believe he actually thought he was going to die, obviously you're not going to really be able to have this conversation. This is more of an internecine inside conversation with Christians. But if you're gonna put your flag down to say, okay, I'm going to start exploring the history of the theory of atonement in the church, then you kind of have to go back to the times of to the context and the milieu of the Torah and the prophets, which precede Yeshua of Nazareth by hundreds of years. There's a cool proverb, and I don't remember the reference right now, but it's essentially like, I see the picture in my head. The way the proverb works is like, trying to get in the middle of an argument between friends is like grabbing a dog by the ears. I don't know if you've ever tried to grab a dog by the ears, but it tends to not go well. You don't get a nice result. And I part of what I think the proverb infers is that this is an argument between brothers. It can be quite ferocious. An argument between people that are close can be very, very intense. And you may underestimate how complicated the back and forth is because you're just not privy to a lot of what's motivating each party. And I think Yeshua's arguments with the Pharisees were a lot like that. They were internecine. He actually said, the only person he said, "Hey, you're at the line. You're there. This is the secret of the kingdom of heaven." He says that to a young man who's a Pharisee. Of the Pharisees, he says, "You go right up to the gate of the kingdom of heaven, but then you stop and you bar others." We'll see that as just like a really harsh, sweeping critique, but it's also a praise, because they actually identified the gate and they got up to it. Whereas, for example, the Sadducees, I just don't see Yeshua being very emotionally invested when he says, hey, you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. And so I'm just kind of, again, like I said, this video is going to be quite frenetic and hopping around. But I want to say, okay, Yeshua was in internecine arguments with contemporaneous Second Temple Jews. They had very, very codified concepts, definitions, and pictures, rituals of atonement. This subject for them was deep. It was an immense subject, and it's not like a scant thing. And I'm not trying to make it look like everyone. There wasn't a Judaism. There were Judaisms, right? In Yeshua's day, there were all these competing sects, but they had very, very clear sources of authority that, even in various camps, they would point to the authority. How they interpreted the authority, we'll start with the Torah. How they interpreted the authority of the Torah, yes, they'd be at odds with each other. They would fight each other over that. But for the most part, they would say that the Torah is authoritative, and it's going to be the thing that sets the semantic range of how we understand this atonement thing. And I mean, I'm kind of giving you a background into, hey, when I want to explore the history of atonement theory, I want to take it back to the Torah. I want to say, hey, this is where Yeshua rooted a lot of these concepts and words. This was just so bedrock to his ministry that it's settled. It's a settled matter. A lot of the critique and the argument and the back and forth are on items that are not settled, but 2, 3, 4 layers up in the ministry of Yeshua. That said, I would want to explore. And in exploring the history of atonement theory, I want to take it back. I don't think Christians are doing that. I don't think, for the most part, Christians are saying, let me try to use the Torah first as a means of enlightening how Yeshua made atonement for me, for example. I can share a little bit about, like, this is a very personal issue for me. And I don't know if on this video I probably won't go into some of the personal aspects. What I have found in among Protestants and of different stripes is when they want to talk about atonement, they tend to bring a lot of terms that just aren't in the Bible, or this is a common one. They'll bring terms that are terms in the Bible, but are never associated with atonement, or are never associated with the concept of making atonement. So they'll bring them together, so that you couldn't say that their speech is unbiblical in the sense that the words are unbiblical or the concepts are unbiblical, but the way that they're merging them is unbiblical. I think the area that's most interesting to me is the illusion of continuity. It's the idea that the way I feel when I pick up Genesis or Bereshit, and I approach that, maybe I have my NIV Bible or something, and I'm opening it. Like, it's this probably well-intentioned, but I think ultimately dangerous assumption that when I'm holding that thing, well, I'm just looking at it the same way that Moses did. Or I'm looking at it the same way that the Apostle Paul did. I suspect the illusion of continuity is it's a way for humans to, it's like a security blanket. I don't actually want to knock it, because to me it's a beautiful idea that, like, okay, like I think ultimately most people, they don't want to be unnecessarily pugnacious, and they don't want to fight every step of the way, and they don't want their ideology to be fraught with battle, and they don't want to piss people off, and they don't want to make things more complicated than they need to be. And so essentially the illusion of continuity tends to be like, people enduring the turbulence of uncertainty and saying, okay, am I in step with Am I in step with the people who came behind me? And I do that. I want to know that, hey, what I'm believing is faithful to the apostolic witness, for example, what we see in the New Testament. I'm near obsessive about that. I want the church to conform to the churches I see in the New Testament. But the illusion of continuity, it is an illusion. It is the idea that nothing has changed, that the concepts haven't changed, that I believe the same way that Paul did, the same way that Jesus did, the same way that Moses did, all the way down. The illusion of continuity serves ideological agendas better than it serves Jesus. The illusion of continuity serves people's ideological agendas better than it serves Jesus of Nazareth. The cool thing about Jesus of Nazareth is he simultaneously exerts his power and his humility by just not caring about the illusion of continuity. He is able to actually drive forward his kingdom, even if entire pockets of civilization endure catastrophe and difficulty, and they lose access to certain concepts. He's humble enough to continue working with them. He's patient. He doesn't need humans to be the safeguard of revelation. That's one of the cool parts about having an indestructible high priest. I mean, he has a life that's indestructible. There's the Twilight movies are super, super corny. And my wife was kind of into them. And I remember in watching, I think the first one or something, seeing that, I think the guy's name's Edward, the vampire, seeing the main vampire, seeing the protagonist vampire stand in his room with no bed is like, that was just like so stark to me. Like, oh my gosh, to never have to sleep. I don't enjoy the way that weakness gets in the way of productivity and my own weakness. But think about that with Yeshua. His life is indestructible. He's overcome death. He's overcome weakness. Think about it. He doesn't sleep. Everything lays naked before his eyes. Do you think he needs people to be able to hold on to these concepts? Otherwise, they're just lost forever. And technically, because Yeshua is a high priest forever, and he's a faithful high priest, and he became like humans, and he partook in every manner. He became like us. He took on the form of a slave. He's still in that form. So technically, there is always going to be a human who knows what the Father wants. And I'm using this. I'm referring to this aspect of Christology to show, like, if the Father has in Yeshua Yahweh taking on the human experience, Yahweh taking on flesh, and being a human still. One mediator, the man, Jesus Christ. If Yahweh has this, why does he need us as safeguards? Like, how are we essential? I'm not saying we don't have jobs to do, and I'm not saying he doesn't share work, because he does share work. He's kind. I'm asking the question of, like, how essential, how necessary is it for the church to have every single I dotted, T crossed in passing on ideas? Now, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that good doctrine can be faithfully reproduced and taught. I'm not saying it's worthless, but I'm just saying it's okay. It's okay, like Jesus has it. I'm also saying, too, as a warning, because Jesus has it, and it's okay. Many, many swaths of Christendom have deceived themselves into thinking that they are the bastions of truth, and Yeshua is still alive. That tomb is empty, and he's the bastion of truth, and he's the high priest, and he's our leader. And he can wait, he can be patient, and he can actually cause truths that have just been lost to re-blossom and show up again. And one of the funny things about how that happens historically is there are ideas that were, I think, bedrock in Yeshua's day that have been lost because of historical developments. And then when they rise up again, Christendom, instead of embracing it, a lot of pockets of Christendom end up hating it and attacking it. But that said, how should we go about exploring the history of atonement theory? I'll say that this is the random, rambling part one of how should we go about exploring the history of atonement theory, and I'll try to get my thoughts together and touch on some key ideas that I think are key historical ideas within the development of atonement theory in the church. And hopefully that's a little bit more navigable for watchers. So I may even label and title this as Be Warned.